somehow still find myself empathizing with this guy. It does a great job of creating that, and if someone's listening who hasn't seen the movie, that would be hard to imagine after everything that we just described.
Welcome to What Haunts You, a podcast about the stories that haunt our dreams. I'm Carly. You can find me over on Instagram at What Haunts You Pod. And talking to me today, we have my friend Kelly, who's probably my biggest cinephile friend, I would say. So welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about another movie. If anyone is interested in more of my opinions on film, they can find me on Letterboxd. My username is Kellyvk, Kelly, V is in Victor, K. We covered It Follows last time, so if you haven't listened to that episode already, it's a good one too.
It was a really good one. You really like came to play with that one, which I really
Well, I love movies, so easy to
yeah.
talk about something you love.
Fair enough. And hopefully that'll be kind of the same vibe today. So today I'm so excited that you proposed this because this might have been a movie that I forgot about and never watched again. Today we're going to be talking about the silent film The Phantom Carriage, which is maybe the first horror movie, kind of, right?
Yeah, it's interesting if you think about the timing, right? So it came out in 1921. It's a Swedish film. It came out technically after The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, although at the time, Caligari wasn't able to be screened outside of Germany by a lot of countries because there were a lot of post-World War I restrictions on those. And so this may have been the first horror film that people saw outside of Germany. And it definitely has a lot of the trope or helped set up a lot of the tropes that you see in other films around the same time, right? I think close to The Phantom Carriage coming out, Haxan came out a year later. That's also Swedish. And Nosferatu came out a year later. So right around that advent of silent horror.
It's funny. I think that those are the only three silent films that I've watched, actually.
Oh man, have you seen The Phantom of the Opera, the original?
No, I haven't. I should.
You should.
Okay, I have to put that on my list.
Yeah. And that was a few years after this one too.
Okay, so before we get into like the nitty gritty of it all, an experience that I had, I think when I think it was when I saw Nosferatu the first time, was that I ended up watching, I like found it online, whatever, and I ended up watching one that had the wrong score. And I like don't even really remember how I found that. I've since, seen the seen the right one. But so I was looking up online to make sure that I was watching it with the original score. And I saw that in the Criterion collection, like DVD and Blu-ray, they actually have two scores.
They do.
So as someone who loves this movie as much as you, I'm kind of curious, have you watched it with both? Like, do you have strong feelings about that?
I have not watched the second one that's like an experimental score that's a little bit newer. So I do want to give that a watch at some point. I think that the score that the main Criterion collection has, I think it was recorded in the 90s maybe. It's just really, really good. So, I'll give the other one a chance at some point, but I love the way that the strings work in the score that's on that version. So, I don't know. Is that the version that you watched as well?
I watched the original one too, and I
Hmm.
agree with you that like the score was phenomenal. I think that it was really, the music felt like very impactful for the scenes, I think. So
Hmm.
it's hard to imagine. I guess I heard like a couple of clips of the other one, and it's hard to imagine an entire, particularly a silent movie
Hmm.
with that kind of a score. But I'm probably gonna have to check it out at some point because I'm curious enough.
Yeah, I agree. I'm curious too.
So the big question I think is, why do you love this movie so much, and why are we talking about it? I said, hey, I want to do this again. You gave me a list, and this was all of the whole list was good, but this is like a standout one that I don't think anyone else would have suggested to me, which is hard. so excited about
Yeah,
it.
I thought it would be fun to go way back and do an early horror movie. I mean, I'd love to also later in this discussion discuss is it a horror movie? Like what genre really is this movie? But the way that I discovered this movie is I was a huge Ingmar Bergman fan who has done a number of great movies that we'll talk about a couple of them later. But Ingmar Bergman was significantly influenced by this film and by the director Victor Sjöström. So Victor Sjöström was a very early Swedish director. By the time Bergman started making movies in the 40s, Sjöström was already a legend, had decades of filmmaking under his belt. Bergman said that by the time he died, he had watched this movie over 100 times. He was obsessed with it, inspired his love of filmmaking, and he is constantly nodding it in his movies. And so that alone just got me curious about it. So I watched it for the first time and I was really blown away. I think that silent films can be challenging to watch for modern viewers, and I think this does a really good job of keeping you engaged and telling the story visually rather than overly relying on title cards. So this movie has 132 title cards in total, which is not very many for its runtime compared to others. And only 9 of those are expository. All of the rest are dialogue. So it really relies on the visuals and the conversations between the characters to tell the story rather than telling you what's happening in text. Which, like, I don't know if you've seen Vampire that came out 11 years after this movie, but that movie is well loved because of its mood and its visuals. But I found parts of it almost unwatchable because it goes back and forth between telling you in text what
Mm,
is happening and then showing it to you, and you're like, oh my god, like just show it to me. I don't need this. And I think this film has much more restraint and then uses visuals really powerfully. And it also just does some really amazing things with the filmmaking. Just really, really cool visuals.
yeah, the effects are just like haunting and beautiful and really good, like good.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we're sitting here. I was about to say 2024. That's not true. We're sitting here in 2025,
Yeah.
right? You can look at it and be like, oh, that's literally just like double exposure, very simple, whatever. But it's,
Mhm.
first of all, done really, really well.
Mhm.
It's done convincingly. And in some moments, it kind of gives me the same feeling I get on like the Haunted Mansion ride at Disneyland, but
Yes.
in a way that I like. And then at other times, I'm like, wow, this is really, really beautiful and like almost maybe more beautiful than it would be if it looked quote unquote real, as it probably would if someone made it today.
Yeah.
And I think, it seems like there just are so many things overlaid over each other because there are so many different like ghostly figures and so many different levels of interaction happening, which I think is also one of the things that makes it so watchable compared to other some other silent movies. And I think that another thing about it that works so well is it's so layered. Like it's flashbacks and flashbacks and flashbacks and flashbacks
Mhm.
within flashbacks, and it's you have to pay attention because if you look away for like it's not a like you can't have your phone out during this movie. You know what I mean? You look
Yeah.
down for 1 minute and you're like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah, the storytelling structure is really, really innovative, and then and yeah, the multiple exposures on the film. I just want to quickly describe how they had to do that because it's so
Yeah.
mind blowing, right? Um, so they would first film the background scene, and then they would run that film back through the camera and have the ghostly characters usually on a black background, right, walking, and maybe they would need to use a black mask on top of the lens to block out certain parts. Then they could overlay another layer, and every single time they're literally feeding the film back through the camera again. Like, optical printers weren't invented until I think the 30s or 40s, which is where they could actually print layers on top of each other. So
Yeah.
every different layer here had to actually be filmed, and you're risking like ruining that film and doing it wrong, right? Like it's there's
Yeah.
little room for error, and also it's the camera at this point is hand cranked, so the person filming it, right, has to be very careful to get the speed the same way that they did on the original footage. Like it's amazing to think about, and then you think about the fact they filmed this movie in 3 months.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for the effects, right? Like highly precarious almost is
Yeah.
like the word that comes to mind. But 3 months, I mean, I think about like old Hollywood and how that was often something that tried to be rushed through, and like people would be shuffling from like one set to another on the same day.
Yeah, they didn't have like as robust of a studio system in Sweden, but they did have a studio. This studio at the time was trying to shift from making more pictures to making higher prestige pictures and investing a little more time in them. But I think, 3 months might have been normal at the time, but most movies weren't doing these kinds of effects, and this complex filmmaking. So I think it's pretty amazing. I think also the script came together really quickly. The script was written in 8 days. And Victor Sjöström also wrote the script. He's, the director and the star of the movie. He wrote the script based on a novel, and his scripts would be very detailed in terms of describing the exact shots that he wanted, and what he wanted it to look like. So imagining writing that in 8 days is just crazy.
Well, and I think about how the writing would have to happen and then the rehearsing for such a precarious process of filming over existing film.
Mhm.
The level of rehearsal that must have taken to get everything right and to be in the right spot and hitting the right marks at the
Mhm.
right times. I mean, it's a really unbelievable production just
It
overall.
is. It is. And if this is your first foray into silent film or into films of that era, it may not click at first just how amazing and how groundbreaking it is. It will feel more modern than you expect it to, I think. But you look
Mhm.
at other movies from just a few years before this, and it's like, I mean, they only had invented film a couple decades before this, and the first feature-length film was only like a decade before this. So it's amazing.
It's really amazing, and you have to imagine, I know we will get into later, like, is this a horror film, is this not a horror film?
Hmm.
I'm sure anyone could who knows me can guess what I'm going to say about that, but the thing that I do keep thinking about is just how like earth shattering it might have been to see these effects before your eyes at the time,
Hmm.
right? When like this was nothing of like this caliber had really been done.
Yeah.
To even try to imagine putting myself in that situation where I've never really seen anything like this before,
Yeah.
and how groundbreaking that would be, but also like how horrifying that would have to be. And it makes you think about like all of the other, like in the date, like the earliest days of film, there were, and in photography really, like there were a lot of kind of weird things being done really really early
Hmm.
in those processes. And so it's kind of interesting to think about how some of what was done in photos to kind of like grift, let's say, maybe,
Hmm.
um would be kind of translated into this like art form, right, that has come to be, and how different that would be for people.
Yeah, yeah. One of the very first film innovators, George Méliès, was a magician, and he, used film to do magic tricks that wouldn't be possible in real life. And he was all, I think he was the first person to use double exposure also to create this kind of ghostly effect. Like he would do an effect of someone having their head cut off, or someone disappearing and appearing in a new spot, stepping out of his own body, stuff like that. But he wasn't really doing feature films. He was doing, these like 3 minute, 4 minute sequences
Yeah,
just 20 years before this movie came out.
it was definitely exponential growth, like in a big way.
Yeah.
I guess let's like get into like, more detail of the movie. I mean, the kind of general concept of being faced with death and then having to kind of relive maybe the worst times of your life, but not just the times where something was happening to you, but like the times where you were the thing happening to other people,
Yeah.
which I think is a particular type of reflection, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In some ways, it reminds me a lot of like a Christmas Carol, right? Like going back and looking at your life, you're like, oh, I really screwed up.
Yeah. I feel like I should confess this as we are recording this, which is so of a piece with that in a way that I'm aware of. I've actually never seen that or read it. Um, so I know the premise, so I know why they're of a kind, but like I don't know anything else about it. So
But yeah, I mean, it's a similar concept of someone who's really morally corrupt, right? Going and being forced to face their past and the good times that they screwed up and with their own actions, and also get a sense of what's left for them because of the way that they've screwed up, and at the end you have a moral shift and resolution with that character, and they get a chance to try to be better. So in that basic outline, it's very similar.
I'm like so tempted to ask you what you think about the ending, but I guess it's early. It's early to do that.
Yeah, let's get there when we get there. I wanted to quickly just highlight like the inspiration for this movie because I think it's pretty interesting. So it's based on a 1912 novel called Thy Soul Shall Bear Witness by Swedish author Selma Lagerlöf. So Selma Lagerlöf was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize in Literature in 1909, and she got a studio deal with a studio in Sweden for them to produce one adaptation of her works per year. And so Sjöström had previously adapted three. He would write the screenplay and bring it to her and talk with her and see, get her thoughts on it. She was actually criticized for being too excited to have her books adapted for film. Like this would degrade the quality of her work because film was looked down upon at the time as an inferior medium. I wonder too if any male authors were getting that kind of criticism, right?
I was thinking that too. I feel like it's that kind of tightrope walk of if she hadn't been very excited, they would have said she was not appreciative, and if she was visibly excited, they would be why are you so excited? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, it's the curse of an ambitious woman. But but she
For
was a
sure.
fan of the director. She was a fan of Sjöström, and she liked having him adapt her works. Sjöström, beginning in 1912, made 26 films in 4 years, and only a handful of those movies are still around. Sadly, this is one of only a few of his Swedish films that still exist.
Have you seen all of them, or are you like working your way through them?
No, I haven't seen any of them except for this one, but I have a list. And he also had a prolific career in Hollywood as well
Yeah,
after he made this movie under the name Victor Seastrom.
which is, of course,
Yeah,
right?
gotta emphasize the name. Yeah, but he was the main character. The director Victor Seastrom. He also had been an actor since he was like 16, so he was hands in all of the different aspects of filmmaking. The Swedish title, Kor Karlin, means the driver or the wagoner. So it more refers to Death's driver than the carriage itself. I like the name the Phantom Carriage. I think it's a cool translation that's not direct.
I'm a little torn about the translation. I do love the name. I loved the name like initially, but I like the kind of ambiguity of it just being called the driver or the wagoner that you might not. I mean, I don't know how whatever advertising for movies was like back then, but I do think that's like kind of interesting that you might show up and not have any idea of the ghostly phantom elements of it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it actually makes sense too because there was I think a lot of censorship of supernatural content at that time for religious reasons where that it was corrupting or whatever. So, that may have been a way to get people in the door that wouldn't have seen it otherwise. I'm not sure. That's a great point.
I'm always interested in the ways that not just silent film, but I think even today, like the ways that mistranslation in subtitles too, not mistranslation, but maybe translation that like misses the nuance
Yeah.
of what's being said. I'm always like very interested in what gets lost in translation, literally.
Yeah, the translator faces a choice between being as close as possible to the text literally or being as close as possible in terms of the meaning.
Hmm.
So book itself is based on an old British legend. So there, this is an already kind of I don't know, a mythology or a legend that existed in Britain, was this idea of the last person to die on New Year's Eve becoming death's driver for the next year.
Which is actually a horrifying concept, honestly. Um,
It
I
is.
had never heard of it prior to the movie, and I was thinking about it, and then obviously in the context of the plot of the movie, I was like, wow, you have to do that all year, and then you get there, and you're like, oh, maybe my like buddy is gonna take over for me and have to do this after me, and how kind of awful, how kind
Yeah.
like it's already awful enough that you're having to do it, and then you're like, oh, you might be next, my friend. That's kind of
It is. It is scary.
yeah.
Right. So we start on New Year's Eve, right? Sister Edith is in her deathbed calling out for David Holm. Like she has to speak with him before she dies. And I
Mhm.
apologize for the anglicized names here,
Yeah.
but
Better than the mispronunciations that would be inevitable
yeah,
otherwise.
yeah. So her two Salvation Army friends leave. Right, the woman goes to David's home, which is in a slum. His children
Mhm.
are asleep in bed. His wife's in the corner staring at the wall. Later, right, we learn that this is when his wife is deciding to kill her children and herself.
Mm.
So it makes that scene a lot darker in retrospect, even. You know, you don't really know why she's upset. And once you watch the movie through, it's like, ooh,
Mhm.
rough.
Yeah. The wife, I think, for me, like, had the best performance in the entire movie.
She's fantastic.
Her, I mean, I guess like face acting, right? Like, I just feel like she was so emotive, and there were flashback scenes where everything was good, and you could like see the softness there, even though she wasn't, I don't want to say overacting, but like, the way that silent films can be a little overacted because they're relying only on visual medium. She was really able to do it with subtlety, but also intensity. That was really, really cool.
Yeah, the acting is incredible. And then also the use of close up in a lot of shots is really helpful, I think, to highlight the human face. That was something that Bergman also used a ton of, is a close up on the human face. So you really get that nuance. And I think that at the time was not very common to have those extreme close ups. But yeah, she's excellent. And then we flip to David Holm. There's no title card, but you immediately just know who he is, right? um, how he's framed. And he's drinking in a churchyard cemetery with his friends. So between the woman on her deathbed and the guy drinking in a cemetery, we're introduced. Death is everywhere, right, from the very beginning. And he's telling his friends the story. This is the first of many flashbacks that we get. I think there's four overall flashbacks, although there's layers to them. At least two New Year's Eves ago, he's at a homeless shelter with his drinking buddies, and his friend George tells them the legend of the Phantom Carriage. George, to me, here, when I was watching it, it made me think of this classic horror trope role, which is like the warning guy.
Don't go to the camp first.
Right, like the guy in Friday the 13th, like this, So it's funny to see that here in such an early example. He basically sets up like, hey, y'all are fighting on New Year's Eve. You really don't want to be fighting on New Year's Eve because if you die, you're in trouble.
It's a crucial role.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's great. It sets the tone of suspense and discomfort early, and the inevitable outcome that we're gonna get, right? And then we get the first couple of shots of the Phantom Carriage. These are really cool. It's silhouetted on a hill, and then you get the close up of Death's driver sitting on the carriage, and then he arrives at this house and walks through the door, which is such a cool shot.
So well done.
Again, like him disappearing through the door. It's really well done. He disappears at the exact right time. They do the perspective perfectly, and we see this super gothic library interior and see the gun in the drawer of the desk, and you immediately know why the driver's there, right? A lot of great visual storytelling here. The hooded figure walks in at the exact moment of suicide. And I think it creates this atmosphere of like inevitable doom that when the driver's showing up, he knows where to go. He's already there ready when the guy kills himself.
Right. And he has to watch.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oof.
I mean, I think that's like part of the kind of tragedy of the plight of the wagoner, the driver, right, isn't just the collection, but it's also the powerless witnessing
Yes.
and having to be death while also being subjected to death over and over and over again.
Yes.
I guess it's for a year, but that would feel like a quite a long year, I imagine.
Horrifying. Horrifying. I wonder like if you actually think about how many people die every year and how many people probably die at the same time, like are there multiple death
I
drivers?
I had a similar I actually had a similar thought because I was like, I feel like we stopped telling stories like this as we became more connected via distance, like as we had phones, the internet, like it becomes less feasible to even have a legend like this. And so then I was like, is it regional? Like where are the borders for this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of it's like the Santa Claus dilemma, right? Of like how
Yes.
does everybody's house on the same plate.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, and we get the next death from the carriage driver. He drives over the sea. One of uh, oh this sequence is so cool. Like how many layers here have to be involved. I mean, he's driving between the rocks on the ocean and then goes down underwater. And underwater you have like seaweed in the foreground. Like it's so well done as he retrieves the dead sailor from the bottom of the sea. I think that's
Mhm.
one of my favorite shots in the film.
It's definitely it's like in my top two, but like my other one is kind of silly and arbitrary. So I would say it was my favorite shot. It was definitely the most like striking and the most beautiful shot. It was just I mean, not even just the one shot of him like taking the soul, but kind of the whole sequence of the carriage in the water. And I think you are feeling sorry for this dead sailor, right? But you are also, I think, feeling very sorry for this death figure, for the wagoner having
Hmm.
to do this, right? And having to kind of go into these into people's homes, into isolated places, right? Like into all of these spaces and really see kind of like again, right, just death is everywhere.
Absolutely. This made me laugh. So, in silent movies of this era, they use the blue tint for nighttime, right?
Mhm.
And the amber tint for inside lamplight kind of
Yeah.
thing. One thing that's really notable about this movie was it did actually film outside at night. So those scenes in the graveyard in the cemetery, those were actually filmed at night when they're walking around outside. Those are actually filmed at night. And when you contrast this movie to like, Nosferatu that came out the following year, it's very obvious the difference. I watched Nosferatu a couple days ago because I wanted to compare the
Mhm.
two, and the nighttime scenes in Nosferatu are so obviously filmed in daylight. It's like almost painful at times. As much as that movie is cool in other ways, the blue tint, but you can see the shadow of the carriage as it goes by or whatever. Like it's very obviously
All the daylight cues everywhere.
yeah. Whereas here it's super dark and super moody and it feels like nighttime. It's not just the blue tint.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but I do remember thinking the scene, like the early scene of them drinking in the cemetery, like, wow, this looks really good. I was like,
Yeah.
why does this look so good? But that, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? It's even when we're not, I think I can imagine watching Nosferatu immediately after this. You're also in that kind of comparative mode where you just watched this like really, really well done thing, but I think even when you're not paying as much attention and you're not maybe like consciously clocking things like shadows, you still kind of have it's almost like that uncanny valley type of a thing, but not with
Yeah.
people, where you're just like something is not right, and I don't always know what it is, but I can tell that like something is not, my brain isn't buying a piece of this.
Yeah, yeah. I had to like consciously remind myself that I was watching something at night, like this was a nighttime scene because I was like, oh, it's blue.
Yeah.
Whereas like at the time that was normal cinematic language that people were used to, so it was probably easier for them to buy into it. But for us, that's just not how we view night scenes. Like nighttime
Hmm.
filming is very normal,
Yeah.
and so it's not enough to just tint it blue. But it was very difficult to do nighttime filming with the cameras that they had at the time. So I can't blame them too much, but I love that this movie goes over and beyond with setting the mood and with using nighttime to
Hmm.
full effect. That flashback ends, right? We find out George died a year later on New Year's Eve.
Hmm.
Wonder if that'll come up again.
That's nothing.
And then we get this sort of cross cutting between the churchyard and Edith over the next few minutes here. Like she's thinking about him, or maybe there's this sort of psychic connection that also is reminiscent of Nosferatu, where there's cutting back and forth between the woman and her husband when
Hmm.
he's off being threatened by the vampire. She's like sensing it over here or something. Obviously, it's not deliberate homage because this came out first. Maybe Nosferatu was homaging this. I don't know.
And I feel like that has like become a bit of like a minor trope where that will happen, where there will be a transition from something bad happening to one character and then their friend, mother, partner, whoever, like waking up from a nightmare or something along those lines where they're like something is wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And this may be one of the first examples of that
So
idea.
fun.
Yeah. So David gets into a fight with his friends. They think he's like bullshitting him, or I don't remember exactly what starts the fight, right? But the bell is tolling at the church. We don't actually hear it, right? Because it's silent, but you can tell. It shows the clock. They do enough visual cues that you know what's going on. And right at the final stroke of the clock, he's whacked over the head with a bottle and he's down. And this is we can get more into the themes later, right? But alcohol is like a huge theme in this movie, and in the context that it came out, it came out in the 1920s. Temperance was a huge
Mhm.
movement. The Salvation Army was very involved in that movement, which is
Yeah,
also very central here.
it definitely has a reefer madness kind of an element
Yeah.
to it, right? Of like if you drink with your friends, like you're gonna kill you're gonna kill one of them, or one of them will kill you, right? And
Yes.
kind of fear mongering cautionary tale kind of a feel to it.
Yes, Reefer Madness is a great comparison. I had the exact same thought when I was watching it this time. It really is like you touch that bottle and things go downhill really fast. So some people when they watch this movie, they claim that David's actually imagining everything that happens after he's hit on the bottle and he was just unconscious.
Huh.
I don't like that interpretation too much because I like the way that he kind of interacts with Sister Edith. That all being in his head doesn't really make a lot of sense. I don't know if you have strong thoughts on that either way.
I certainly like the straightforward version where he actually just gets picked up by the fan. Like I prefer that for myself. I think something I was thinking about through all of these films, these and then the Bergman ones, was that this is a story we keep telling over and over again of some sort of tragedy or life altering something that just shakes everything up and really makes you step back, take inventory, really reflect. And I think that we do often put these stories in the context of death because I think that is ultimately the point of no return where you either do it now or you don't do it, right? That's kind of what it is. But if there's a lesson, the lesson isn't before you die, you should think about it. It's like we shouldn't wait until we die to think about it. And I think that's a lesson we're still kind of learning as humans.
Yeah.
And so I do think that's like an interesting perspective, just in the sense that wouldn't it be nice? And again, I think for myself, I'm not accepting this like as like a head canon, but I do think it's nice to imagine that maybe it wouldn't take dying for him to go through this process of reckoning and go through this process of reflection and that maybe it could happen without that level of tragedy, which it like often, doesn't, which I think is why people come back to this motif and this story.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, death is that ultimate moment of finality where you can't go back from there, right? And there are all these stories of people having near-death experiences and it changing their lives, or having an overdose and that being what, sets them on a different path or something. Is that realistic from a psychology perspective, or is that overstated, do you think?
Hmm. I do think it often takes pretty extreme things, but I don't think that it requires it. Something that I think does get talked about a lot, I think particularly in addiction spaces, is like this idea of rock bottom, right? Everybody's rock bottom is different though. You know what I mean? And I don't
Hmm.
know if you have like any addicts close enough in your life where like you ever would have gone to like a 12-step meeting,
Mm-mm.
but I've gone to some of that was for school, some of that was for work, and some of that was with people that I know. And you hear people's stories, and some people's rock bottoms don't sound so rock bottomy, and some people's are horrible, like awful, 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 and it's just like how you react to it. But one of the things that
Mhm.
does get spoken of is kind of that when we go through terrible things, it kind of forces us to do this, and it's a little harder to sit in a comfortable place and say, let me really take out my microscope and get into this. And when people work the steps, and I don't think everybody has to do like whatever, people get sober how they get sober, but when people work the steps, they do their moral inventory. That is like what, which is kind of what this film is, before that was a thing, that's kind of what's happening here. That is like a big part of it. And I think that most of us don't do that. It's easy to
Mhm.
ignore that kind of stuff when things feel comfortable and good and stable. And when we want to change our lives in a big way, we're more motivated to do that if things don't feel good and stable.
Yeah.
And then we're more likely to say, okay, if things have gotten so out of hand, what was my part in that? I think it is true, but I don't think it has to be true. It's just that a lot of us don't sit down and decide to do it. And it's thrust on some people.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think it's interesting too. We'll get to this in just a second as we talk through the plot. But he has an earlier moment where he has a rock bottom of sorts, but it's too late already in that moment, right, for him to make the change that he needs to. So he dies. We'll say. I think that's the
Yeah.
best interpretation. And and George shows up in the Phantom Carriage.
Tragedy. Tragedy all around, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. This is another point of commonality with A Christmas Carol because it's one of Scrooge's friends who passed away who comes to tell him about the three ghosts that are going to visit him.
Oh.
It was too late for his friend. So the idea of your friend who it was too late for being your sort of guide into this reflection is common between the two.
Mhm.
I don't know if the author had that in mind when she wrote it or not, because A Christmas Carol had already come out, decades before this, or if it's a happy coincidence. But that's a point of similarity for sure. So they go on off on the Phantom Carriage and straight to Sister Edith's bed, and she's not ready to die. She says, it's come too soon, and there's just one last person she needs to talk to before she dies, and she begs for more time. And I don't know, I don't think we actually said the two movies from Bergman that I asked you to watch were Wild Strawberries and The Seventh
Yeah.
Seal. But this concept of bargaining with death is especially a big theme in The Seventh Seal. There's a little bit of that also in Wild Strawberries, but much more literally in The Seventh Seal and in The Phantom Carriage. So she believes that she's caused great misfortune. Somehow she's placing some of the blame for what's going on with David on herself, and she has this pure sort of love for David that I honestly find confusing.
I think of all of the elements of the story, like this is the part where I feel the most surprised that the original story that this was based on was written by a woman, because I find it very confusing.
Mhm.
I mean, first of all, he's pretty terrible. I think people are redeemable, whatever. I'm not saying he should die, but he's pretty bad. He's a pretty bad guy. And he knows that. immediately. And there is kind of that,
Yeah.
and this is jumping ahead a tiny bit, but there is that moment where she's like, I want you to stay here so that I can continue to challenge you, or whatever the line is. And it's like,
Hmm.
it feels so, it's hard to believe a woman wrote that, I think.
What's interesting is in the book is a little bit different in
Mm,
terms of their relationship. It's actually a sort of soulmate romantic relationship between the two of them in the book, and the wife is actually thrown under the bus. And here, Victor wanted the wife to have more dignity as the real victim.
yeah, that kind of goes to the same kind of like purity vibes as the temperance element, right? Of like, the wife inherently has to be the good woman, right? There's always got to be like kind of a good woman and a bad woman. I would say less bad in this one, but there's always kind of the one who ruined everything and the one who like got screwed over or something.
Yeah, yeah, and in the book, I think the wife takes more of the blame for like abandoning him, even though that abandonment obviously is completely understandable and justified and necessary for her safety, as we will get
Yeah.
to. But I think that another way maybe to look at Edith's character within the film is, I was thinking if it's almost a codependent sort of view of him. Like she wants to, she's in the Salvation Army because she wants to save
Hmm.
souls, because she wants to convert people, because she wants to save them, she wants to improve them, and she wants to feel like she's done that for him. And he, as we'll get to, has consistently rejected all of her attempts to try to help him, and it almost like makes her want it more.
She really turns him into a project.
Exactly.
I can fix him.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I think that codependency, gets very much into the alcohol piece of this whole story. I do think it's not the best encapsulation of alcohol issues I've ever seen, right? But it is very much there. It's very central. And I do think viewing her as this kind of codependent figure who really just wants to get in there and fix it and get in there and make it better, and be the person who changes this other person's life, it rings true. It rings true, and it feels like that view of their relationship really bolsters the alcohol conversation in an interesting way.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. Probably a common dynamic with addiction of having a partner. Well, she's not his partner, but having that person who can't accept the fact that you're in addiction, and can't accept the fact that it's not their role or their job to fix it.
Right.
Here's where we start getting into the other flashbacks. So first we see David at the very beginning, his family life and decline, right? The color tinting here is cool. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but when we flip back to him first picnicking with his family on the lawn, it has this pink rosy tint, and that made me think of like rose tinted glasses a little bit, and the way that we like look back
Hmm.
at the good times in the past. I don't know that it's intentional. There's other outdoor daylight scenes that have that rose sort of tinting. Maybe that was just the effect of the tint on outdoor scenes. I don't know, but it works in my head canons. We get these sort of idyllic scenes with his family, a scene that is replicated in both Wild Strawberries and The Seventh Seal. Them picnicking and eating strawberries in Sweden in a meadow.
Very, very nice, honestly, though. Like, I would love to. I wish that we could be sitting on a field in Sweden eating strawberries right now.
It does sound nice. It does. This scene fades. Well, his family fades, and he's in the same position, and his friends fade in, and they're getting drunk in the same field very quickly, right? So it
Mhm.
kicks off his decline very quickly, and it ties it very directly to alcohol.
Yeah.
His younger brother becomes a drunk. He comes into the family's house being mean to the kids, being a complete asshole.
Belligerent. Yeah.
Yeah. The wife takes him outside, and oh, there's David laying face down in the street, and she doesn't even seem surprised. It's like this is their life now. it gets to the point, right, where now the brother has become a murderer. He's in jail. David sees him, and this is that moment where he has his first rock bottom moment and chance for redemption. And
Hmm.
he says he's going to change his ways. He's going to go find his wife. He's going to make things right. And he runs out of the jail cell and he runs up to see his wife, and she's already gone. If he had just realized it earlier, maybe things would have been different. But yeah, I think that's sad that we see this first chance for him to get redemption, but it's too late. It's not that, the dying was his only chance, but this one didn't work out, right? And he's quickly back to alcohol. And that's probably common with addiction too, right? People expect everything to all of a sudden be okay when they stop drinking, and then the second something goes wrong again, they're back.
Well, especially when you think about people today, but like more than that, people back then who didn't, there were no resources for that, right? Everybody who was an alcoholic was a dry drunk when they were not drinking. Nobody was in recovery, right? Everyone was probably really white knuckling it. And I think when you are white knuckling it and you're not getting support, I mean, I think this is true with like any vice. If you're white knuckling it and you're not getting any help and not getting any support, like what else are you supposed to do? Not to excuse it, right? Not to say, oh, like it's great and fine that he would go back to alcohol, but it's like, yeah, you get home and your whole family is gone and like you have nothing. You don't
Hmm.
really have anyone who can provide you the type of support that you need. It's like, what, like truly what else are you supposed to do in that moment but try to escape it somehow?
Yeah, it's really sad. And I don't know exactly when he gets tuberculosis here. It may be between the second, or between that flashback and the next flashback, but he's definitely sick by the time we get to the next flashback.
Hmm.
Tuberculosis plays an interesting role here too, because it's not, the problems aren't just tied to alcohol. He also has this illness, another thing to bring him down and to make him want to drink himself to death, is that he's dying of consumption in two ways.
I think, yeah, I think it's another reason to kind of feel like giving up. And then I think also it's like a mirror to the drinking because he's careless about it, right? He's like coughing in people's face. He doesn't care about how
Hmm.
he's affecting people. And I think that that's true of where he is with alcohol too. Like he's not all that concerned about how that's affecting the people around him. So there's this kind of emphasis on carelessness and almost like a bitterness and a malice towards the people around him that I think can happen to people when they're in a really dark place, right? We're in a dark place, we're being really mean to ourselves, and when we're being really mean to ourselves, it gets real easy to be mean to other people. And then, right, those people leave you because you're being awful to them, and then you feel worse about yourself, you're meaner to yourself, you're mean, right? He's really kind of
Yeah.
living.
People want to isolate themselves from you for their safety. I think the tuberculosis is a good metaphor for like the emotional damage that he's doing to the people around him and his own emotional pain.
Mhm.
As we see like in the next scene, so the next flashback is when he meets Sister Ida. He goes into the Salvation Army for somewhere to sleep for the night, and she mends his jacket. This is how she gets tuberculosis, because it's all over his jacket, and she's like, no, no, it's fine, that our desanitizing machine or whatever is not working right now, like it'll be okay. She fixes his coat and he takes it, and he like asks who mended it, and you think that he's going to actually thank her. She comes out like excited to be thanked, and he just rips it back up again. So he has this extreme like resentment towards being helped, and this desire to like cause other people pain and
Mhm.
make them feel the way that he feels, I guess.
Yeah,
Ugh, it's sad. This is a sad movie.
it is. It's a really sad movie. It's, I think, also one of those movies where you get to kind of view it how you want to view it. Like you could view it and be like, "Wow, this guy's a dick." Fair. You got me right. Like that's. But it's also really, really evidently a tragedy, especially when you contextualize it in the time period and like what life was like and what people could do and couldn't do and access. It's really sad. It's really, really sad to watch this person who clearly needs help and support just be devastatingly mean. And not to say that Edith is super pure motives, right? She I think does have this codependency and this need to be needed. But imagine, like, right? I mean, like, really, like, even just right now, like, if you handed me something and I just like ripped it up in front of your face, that's kind of an unbelievable thing to do.
Oh, it's yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible. And I think as codependent as she may be, I mean, I think it comes from a genuine place of care and of wanting to help people. I think her faith is real. I think she
Mhm.
thinks she's really helping people. It's sad she's rejected. And I don't know if she's an emotional masochist, but she
I
she
mean,
will
yeah.
continue to try. So she asks him to meet her again in 1 year's time. Right, this is another New Year's Eve that he's there. And the use of New Year's Eve is interesting here because we talked about how it's this legend, right? But also New Year's is associated with a time to like start fresh, start new, set resolutions, get off on a good start, and for the year put last year behind us, right? So it's very thematic too that it takes place around New Year's, I think.
Something I was thinking about through this movie and the Bergman movies was, I mean, these movies I think are pretty Christian. So like there's a part of me watching that feels very like outside spectatory. But this one, especially because it was revolving around New Year's, had me thinking a lot about like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur because we have Rosh Hashanah. These are like some of the biggest Jewish holidays in the Jewish calendar, right? And we have Rosh Hashanah, which is the New Year, and then like right after that, we have Yom Kippur, which is basically this movie where you're like, what fucked up shit did I do last year? Where have I let myself down and other people down, right? Where have I essentially like cast pieces of myself away from myself and like become a lesser version of me? And so I was thinking about that a lot during the movie because this is playing that out kind of without probably realizing it.
Yeah, oh that's interesting. With a Christian perspective to not as tied to New Year's, this idea of, atonement for sin obviously is a huge part of
Yeah.
Christianity. Bergman was actually the son of a pastor, a Lutheran pastor, and he had a very hard upbringing, very strict upbringing. He struggled to retain any kind of faith in God after his childhood, and almost all of his movies deal with that in some way. All right, so it's funny to hear it described as Christian. It's definitely very influenced by Christianity, but it's not like a Christian perspective.
Right. It's culturally Christian in a way that I think generally like a lot of horror movies tend to be.
Yeah,
And I think a lot of the time, even I think even today, right, how many people are creating these stories not out of religious belief, but out of their experiences with religion and what it felt like to them and the impact that it left on them, maybe not in their belief, but in their psyche
yeah,
and the stuff that gets its hooks in you when you're really raised that way.
yeah, absolutely. Here is probably out of all of them, right? This is the most just straight up Christian of the movie. I don't know much about Sjöström's personal beliefs. He liked to let his movies speak for themselves. He didn't like to give interviews or talk about them. He would say like the artist should do their work and let the work be the work. But I mean, Sweden is an extremely Christian nation, or it was even more so at the time. And the Salvation Army, obviously, is a very Christian organization, although a controversial one at the time. The Salvation Army was a very teetotaling organization. They required all of their members not to drink alcohol at all. Another aspect of that is they didn't do Holy Communion, which involves drinking a sip of wine. And
Oh.
so this is one way in which they were extremely controversial. They really were a weird fringe sort of movement when they started, and they've gained popularity over time through social works, but their view of Christianity was very fringe when they first started, but very relevant to the sort of teetotaling of this movie. This next flashback is the reunion. The wife coincidentally, I think, ran away to the same town that he moved on to.
You can imagine there probably weren't that
Yeah.
many options.
Yeah, it was close by. I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
but they're in this meeting hall, I guess, of the Salvation Army, and you see his wife notice him, and she kind of hides off in the background. Edith finds David approaching a coughing woman in the back of the hall who clearly also has TB, and he's like mocking her.
Because she's
Yeah,
being
she's
terrible.
trying to cover her cough, like leave everyone alone, and he's like, "Why do you even care? Cough all over him." Like,
It's very cynical. It's very fuck it. It's very we're doomed
yeah,
anyway.
exactly. Like, why do we care what other people?
If I'm going down, you're coming
Yeah, he
with
really
me.
wants other people to feel his misery. Some people, when they have these overwhelming, intense emotions, it's not enough to just feel them. They have to like feel like everyone else feels what they're going through. I don't know. He definitely has that need to spread his misery to others.
I kind of almost wonder with people like that if that's something about wanting to be just understood, that they're not able to look at in a different way, right? Like I do wonder if there's something under there where like if they were more able, willing, whatever it is, to reach out to express like, hey, like this is actually what it is like
Hmm.
inside my head, because they're trying to do that anyway. They're trying to get somebody to have a close enough experience that they could maybe know what's going on in his brain. And it's like, if you could just
Yeah.
talk. And that's such a, I guess, therapist-y thing of me to say. And talking doesn't fix everything for sure, but like talking is the thing that can make us feel
Hmm.
seen and understood. And so there are moments where you're like, if you could just tell someone how you felt and let them empathize with you, would you like want to cough in your kids' faces when you have TB? Like, what would it have done for him for someone to say, like, hey, you seem to be in a lot of pain. What's going on for you? And that's no one's responsibility ultimately, right? But you can't help but
Right,
wonder.
because as much as Edith reaches out to him and wants to help him, she has no understanding of what he's actually going through and what he's actually experiencing. And it's her naivety that leads her, right, to try to reunite the two of them after this meeting.
That was so hard to watch. And I always think about the statistics on domestic violence and how, women are often at the most risk of being killed by a partner right after they've
Yes,
left.
it's extremely naive, extremely dangerous for her to just be like, oh, well, you guys are both here. You must want to see each other. Things will be better now, right?
And in the scene right before they do see, I mean, they've seen each other at the meeting hall, whatever, but like right before they're like really truly reunited, and obviously that goes awfully. And this was one of the moments where I was like, wow, like the person who's playing the wife is really good. She's wringing her hands, you know what I mean? She's fidgeting. She looks really scared and distressed, but also looks like she does not want to look scared and distressed. You know what I mean? It's like you can just see, I know that I can't appear to be in distress when I see this person, but holy shit, I really am so scared. And it's just like written all over her. And it's hard. It's like hard to watch. You kind of know what's gonna happen. And even if you don't know what's gonna
Yeah.
happen, you kinda do. Because this is all about the harm this man
Hmm.
has caused people, and you can see how scared she is. And you don't know, obviously, literally what's going to happen, but you know it's going to be a disaster. You know it's going to be something that just hurts her more. She's obviously clearly been through enough.
Up until this point, I don't think we've actually seen any abuse depicted on screen. We saw him in the gutter. We saw the way that the brother treated the family. It's more just so implied by her reaction, by her running away. And
Mhm.
then we see this next sequence, which is the scariest in the film from like a real life perspective of him coming into the house drunk again, violently banging on the door.
Mhm.
He casts this looming shadow on the wall that,
Loved that.
yeah, very creepy, showing how threatening he is. He goes over, starts coughing in his kids' faces, trying to get them sick. He just wants to get revenge on his wife for leaving him at this point,
And seemingly even his children,
and his
kind of.
children. And it seems like he thinks maybe a good way to punish his wife would be to get their children or hurt their children.
Which is so scary. The willingness to essentially sacrifice his own kids for revenge for something that
Yeah.
ultimately
Yeah,
he
it's
did.
horrifying. She tries to run away and he flies into this rage and she locks him in the room and he grabs this axe and starts chopping the door.
I love so much that you picked a movie that allows you to talk about Bergman and me to
Yeah.
talk about Stephen King for like a minute, because I know I had told you I had seen this movie before, but it was a long time ago and I didn't super remember it. This was one of the things that I remembered really well for obvious reasons. And it's just that really like aggro, so intense. He's hacking at the door with this hatchet. It's so bad to watch, and it's crazy because I think about The Shining really kind of almost shot for shot
Mhm.
duplicating the scene. I mean, there's one less kid, right? And they're in a bathroom, but go look at
Yeah.
a YouTube video that compares them or whatever. It's interesting how effective it is
Mhm.
without the sound. Because when I watched The Shining, I think the sound makes it more scary, but there was something about watching it helplessly and you can't really tell how hard he's hitting things, but you can only imagine it's awful. And it's kind of like when they don't quite show the gore and your brain makes it way worse than it would have been probably on screen, but with
It's
sound.
very chilling, very unsettling. And another similarity with The Shining too is the alcoholism being a major theme.
Yeah.
Right? We don't have to break down The Shining, but that's a major theme of that movie: domestic violence, alcohol, and yeah, this specific scene. Um,
Especially the
right.
movie, like The Shining. And I'm only going to stick with things that are overlap. I'm not going to go not going to go down a whole rabbit hole here. But it is kind of a similarly unsympathetic look at this person who's clearly struggling with
Hmm.
addiction. It's not so nuanced about the person who is drinking. I would say this movie is like fairly nuanced about the people around him, but he's not given that same treatment, and I think that's true of him and of Jack Torrance in The Shining, in the movie The Shining, where they're both kind of put on a platter and just like, here's this
Hmm.
asshole, when you have to know that there's more to it than that, because nobody's just an asshole, but it's kind of is just presented in this really kind of black and white
Yeah, I
way.
mean, I think the one thing this movie has going for it is it does offer a chance at redemption, right? Whereas The Shining, no such luck for Jack Torrance. Uh,
Yeah, especially in the movie, it's really
yeah,
bad.
yeah, he's frozen in that state.
Literally frozen.
Pun
That's true.
intended. So she collapses at his wife, right? At this point when he finally breaks through the door, and you get the sense this is the only thing that stops him from just straight up killing her is she's already collapsed. So this kind of interrupts his whole flow. And you think maybe this is rock bottom finally, right? Maybe this is a moment because he goes to get her some water, and you think that this is a sign of kindness maybe, and she takes the water, and then he says it wasn't so easy to run away this time. It's not about kindness, it's about control.
And you think about that in the context of, again, the way domestic violence works and how there's these cycles, right, where like after a blow up there is that like kind of like honeymoon type, here are flowers, I'm so sorry, like whatever. So he's bringing the water and you're like, maybe they get a period of peace, but then it's like, no, he just wants the control. He feels obviously so powerless in every other respect, right? And he's powerless to the alcohol, and especially in society at that time, right? Like, here is a person I have power over and can just kind of
Mhm.
exert it however I
Yeah.
want.
He is miserable. He hates his life, and having this control over her gives him something because he doesn't have much going for him at all, right? But at least he can
Yeah.
control this poor woman. That scene is chilling, and at least this time when David's rewatching it, he has a breakthrough. So it takes being outside of that moment and watching it back for him to realize how awful he's been, which I think is often how it is for us when we screw up. In the moment, we think that we're
Yeah.
justified, we're not thinking through our actions. But like if we could go back and watch on videotape ourselves at our worst moments, I think a lot of us would have a wake up call.
No, I totally agree. I think that it's not okay to be violent, but if someone is upset enough to be violent, they're also upset enough to not really be able to reckon with their decision to be
They're not
violent.
coming from a place of logic and reasoning.
Yeah, but it's one of the first moments where you really kind of feel like maybe he's starting to see the
Hmm.
problem, which is good on the one hand, but also like, God damn, like you had to chase your wife with an axe to realize that something was wrong. Not even to realize something was wrong, you had to like see it again
Right,
back.
because he was just out drinking with his friends in the cemetery. So he,
Yeah.
doing it wasn't enough. And I don't know when he's out in that
Hmm.
cemetery, like how long after that moment it is. It immediately after? It might be, right? Because she's like making her plan at that time. So you have
Yeah.
to assume it's pretty soon after. And him telling her, it wasn't so easy to run away this time.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, even though obviously it's horrible. This is kind of weird, but when he dies, might that be the first moment he's been sober since that incident?
Yeah, that's interesting.
In the universe of this movie where that is a thing, that he became a spirit,
Yeah.
you do wonder, right? Like, is that the first moment of lucidity that he's even had to look at that incident without the filter of alcohol induced rage?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great point, and I think that's more evidence for the fact that he does die here, right? Like being knocked unconscious while you're drunk is not going to result in the kind of realization that he has here.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I do think that's an interesting take, though. I do think it's an interesting take. But yes, no, I think I would agree with that. That's like some more kind of points in favor of him having an actual an altered state, but an altered state that is kind of the least altered state he's had in so long. That it's probably so different. This just occurred to me, but you know, withdrawal from alcohol can kill you. It's like one of the things that, like, if you're an everyday drinker and you get like the DTs, you should like be actually in a hospital while you're stopping drinking, because you could really easily die. And we're taught that, like, if somebody comes in with really bad alcohol DTs, that's like the shaking and stuff, to treat it as a medical emergency, because it is one. And so to go from daily drinking to a point where you have been sober long enough to have some amount of clarity is like a big period of time where there's a lot of opportunity for relapse and a lot of opportunity for other problems to come up in real life. But to imagine going from the drinking every day to like pure kind of unfiltered clarity of being dead,
Mhm.
like in a second, is wild to think about.
Yeah, not a chance that people get in real life. That's really interesting. So at this moment, right, he finally has his epiphany and he's able to reach through the astral plane and touch her and swears that he'll be a good husband and a good father. And so she's finally ready to die. This is an interesting little religious moment, right? Because the driver says, those who are to receive her will arrive shortly. Like she's too good and pure to go on death's carriage. She gets her
Yeah.
own little send up. And in the book, apparently, you see angelic figures arrive in her
Mm.
room to take her away. I'm glad they didn't do that in the movie. I like that it's just a little bit more ambiguous. It lets you kind of fill it in yourself.
Yeah, I like that for a book, but I have trouble imagining, especially back then, like how they would translate that in a way that felt impactful.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's something like the poltergeist spirits on the staircase kind of thing. But I don't know how you do that with those effects back then.
Yeah.
We go now to the wife. Right, we see the wife that she wants to die. She's lost all hope. We see that what she's putting in the tea. That she's planning on basically poisoning her children and herself. She doesn't want to leave them behind. And David pleads with the death driver to stop them, but that he responds he doesn't have any power over the living. And so then he appeals to God. Unlike what you'll see in any Bergman film, God responds
Yeah.
and allows him to return to his earthly bodies. But when he bursts in the room, like the situation hasn't changed, right? His wife is terrified of him still. She can't trust him, and I think this is where his acting, her acting's great in this scene. His acting, I think, has to do a lot of work to make this
Yeah.
believable that he has actually had a change of heart, because we've watched him just be horrible for an hour and a half. When she sees that he's crying, she realizes that his pride has faded away and decides to forgive him. I love the line. Film basically directly delivers its message with this line, Lord, please let my soul come to maturity before it is reaped. And that gets back to what you were talking about earlier, right? The idea of like we hope it doesn't actually take death to become the person that we want to be.
Because you think about what does it mean to have a mature soul. I mean, this movie has like a Christian lens on this, right? But let's kind of step into more broad terms, right? Like, what is our soul? But the thing in us that is the universe and everything, and like what are you and I connected through, right? Is like my soul to your soul, so to speak. So you have to think about like the maturity of a soul being so directly tied in with like what you do and how you impact the world around you, the people around you, the places around you, like nature. How do you show up in this world that's so much bigger than you and try to leave it better than you found it and maybe try to clean up the mess you already made?
Yeah. Achieving some sort of virtue or goodness while you still can. If you think of virtue as like a skill that you develop over the course of your life, like that, hopefully you've.
And I think it is
Yeah, I
actually.
do too. And you hope that you've put in enough work that you have actually developed that skill by the time you leave the world. And you're not leaving
Yeah.
it the way that David would have left it had he not had this experience.
So all that being said, how do you feel about the ending? Like, how do you feel about him getting a second chance? How do you feel about like him returning to his family?
I have mixed feelings. I like it, but I don't know that he deserves it, but I still want it because what this movie does really well is somehow still find myself empathizing with this guy. It does a great job of creating that and if someone's listening who hasn't seen the movie, that would be hard to imagine after everything that we just described.
We've been shit talking the whole time.
But you really do want him to have another chance. You don't want his wife to kill herself and their children. You want the whole family to have another chance. And it's a nice fantasy to imagine that that can happen here.
Yeah.
Is it realistic? I mean, I don't know.
It's hard to ask if it's realistic in the context of him dying and coming back to life at
Yes,
all.
yeah, yeah, that kind of change. I mean, could someone who is an abusive alcoholic have a near death experience and become better? What kind of additional work does he need to do to actually be
Hmm.
better in like a sustainable way? Like the next time that something bad happens in his life, what's going to stop him from going back to alcohol and going back to his abusive behavior? Like life is hard and it's not perfect sunshine and roses. He's going to be challenged again, and so obviously like that sort of lasting change is not something that's explored here, but I like to
Yeah.
think that it's possible. You know.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it.
What about you? Do you like the ending?
I feel like pretty similar to you in that I want it for him, and I also can appreciate that like it's good to have these stories where things do end happily and you can just kind of take it at face value. I do have trouble doing that, I think whenever I see an ending like this, it just feels rushed, kind of like what you're saying,
Mhm.
like what is the other work that has to follow this moment?
Mhm.
And and I understand that this is just not what this movie was doing, but like I would love to see a similar movie, which will never happen now because no one would make a similar movie now. But I would love to see a similar movie with just a little bit of different pacing,
Mhm.
especially for how long it was. Not that it's long by today's standard, but it's an hour 45. I mean,
Mhm.
it's longish. And I wish they would have given a little more time to like aftermath.
Yeah, what is he
So
actually doing to be a good father and a good husband? Yeah.
or even like a flash forward 5 years and they're just happy and we don't even need to know what he did, but clearly something worked. Right? Like,
Yes.
but some indication where it doesn't feel where you don't have that feeling of like, oh, but like now what? And I will say I am kind of a sucker for a bleak ending. I don't know what that says about me as a person. So I like balk a little at an ending like this, but I also, like you were saying, like I also felt so sympathetic toward him. And I think ultimately this is why stories that have redemption arcs, this is loosely a redemption arc
Mhm.
because we don't really see the nuances of it as much as we would want to. But I think one of the reasons that's so beneficial for us is because we're so quick to label people as good people or bad people in real life.
Mhm.
And I think that the empathy that I feel towards him, I think, is like, this sounds conceited, but I don't mean this just about me. But like, I think that that makes me a better person. Like, I think I'm a better person for like having watched this movie and like looked at it that way.
Yeah.
And I think stories like this, where you can either read it as he's an asshole, and like you're still going to get the whole movie if you read it as just he's an asshole, like it's still going to make sense to you. But I think that when we challenge ourselves to look at these really aggressive, scary, dangerous figures and really allow ourselves to open up to the idea that they're suffering,
Yeah.
I think that's a really powerful thing that any type of stories, be it book, film, anything, music, whatever, I think that's like something that is really cool that is provided for us, because I think it's easier to practice that on something that's not real.
Yeah, movies are empathy machines, as they
Totally.
say. Yeah, yeah. I have a bleak ending for you. Here you go.
Okay.
He's already dying of tuberculosis, so like maybe
That's
he
true.
gets maybe he gets one more year of actually being a good father and a good husband.
That's true. Oh, I was like, fast forward 5 years. I totally wasn't
They're
thinking
all dead.
he was like, that everybody's dying. But that actually, I mean, I think we can kind of with this transition a little bit into these other two movies too. But I said this when we were talking before we recorded, but I've been kind of going through my head of like which of these three movies was my favorite, and I'm bouncing around every hour. But one of my favorite moments was when the guy was like painting in, this was in The Seventh Seal, and he's painting, and the other guy is kind of like, he says, "Why are you painting that?" And the painter says, "To remind people that they're going to die." And I was thinking about that because I think about death all the time. I mean, not in a way that feels super scary to me. Sometimes certainly. I mean, we have a lot of stuff going on in our world, whatever. But more also like death practices and like what meaning does death give to life? Like I think about this stuff a lot, but I also think about how I made a podcast to talk about horror, which is something where people are constantly being killed or dying in tragic ways. And it is funny because it's like, why do we watch horror? And I think part of it is actually to remind us that we are going to die.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Keep that in front a little bit, because certainly there's a point where that can be too far and you're riddled with, death anxiety, which isn't ideal. But I think like also similarly, right, to this idea of, I hope it doesn't take death for me to like look back on my life critically and seriously. If I remember that I'm going to die all the time, I'm much more inclined to be like, I need to be constantly, I don't want to say vigilant because that sounds a little excessive. I can't think of the word that I want to use, but constantly aware and
Yeah.
mindful, I guess,
Yeah.
of my actions, and like, and constantly kind of reassessing and trying to take in feedback and new information, and just kind of keep moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. If you remember that you're going to die, you can make the choices now that, you know, David here makes afterwards, right? We don't get second chances like in movies, so it forces you to think about, this can happen to you at any time, and what kind of life do you want to have lived, and what are you doing right now to live that kind of life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's like one of the threads of this whole kind of group of movies. And I also want to say one of the things that I love is like talking about like families of movies and like movie lineage in the way that you wanted to with the Bergman movies and Phantom Carriage. So I'm very excited to
Yes.
have these presented to me, because I had seen the Phantom Carriage before a long time ago. It was also, I think, maybe the first silent film I watched, which was not a good call, which is probably also why I don't remember it so well from the first time. But now I watched it twice getting ready for this. It's an extremely influential movie, and I know you were like, "Oh wow, I gave you so much homework," but like, I love this kind of thing. I love to see the way that like humans take and repackage and chip away at and add things. Like I just love the way that we continue to make old things new again.
Yeah, this is a great triple feature here because you have the Phantom Carriage that deals with, a ton of flashbacks and memories in the face of death and the consequences of our choices, and how we want to live our life. And Wild Strawberries, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, is all about getting older, looking back at your life and longing for those times in your life where you felt like you were innocent and you hadn't had these hardships and you hadn't screwed things up and you had the world ahead of you, and reconciling with that and the fear of death and the idea that like maybe even at that age you won't feel comfortable necessarily with death or with your life, and that's very scary and hard. And then you have, the Seventh Seal, that's all about a society in the Black Plague where death is everywhere all the time for everyone. It is not this like, yeah, someday I'll die, and I know a few people who have died. It's like everyone is dying everywhere, and this is really scary. And does this make you believe in God more because you need something to cling to, or does it make you believe in God less because you have all this uncertainty around you, and no matter how hard you try to ask God to talk to you and to reassure you, there's nothing that responds to you. And so this common thread, I think, thematically runs through all of these movies. And if you liked those, it's a common thread through most of Bergman's movies.
I was thinking I should work my, I know you've been wanting me to do that for like a long time. But I do feel like this made me yeah, not that I was even like reluctant, but I don't think I had like a fire lit under my butt to do it, so to speak. And I think this like lit that fire, and I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, I gotta like, I have to explore this more. And I just love movies that really make you think and really make you feel. I know that sounds very like, of course, like that's what movies should do, right? But I think movies that get in your brain a little and just like turn some screws.
Yeah, yeah, and I think these do both. They all
Yeah.
do both, right? They all make you feel and they make you think.
And they make you think about like yourself and other people, and like it's just, they're just very effective. Like they're very effective, and I don't mean this in a like way to criticize the movies individually, but I think they work together in a way that makes all of them more than the sum of their parts. I think all of them are totally good and like totally stand on their own 2 feet. But yes, like there was something really, really cool about like walking through these.
Yeah.
And it was definitely really fun to see the level of influence, and like that's just always something that I find really fascinating.
And the influence here, right, is very direct, right? Sjöström mentored Bergman when he first started working on film in Sweden. They had, you know, several conversations as Bergman was just starting out as a new director. And of course, Sjöström is the star of Wild Strawberries and as a much older man. And so it's just such a cool thread to see, this film from the 20s, major influence on this director who made films from the 40s to the 2000s. And he gets to cast his inspiration as the star of his film about aging.
It's really, really cool. And I
Yeah.
think when I was watching all of them, but I think particularly when I was watching Wild Strawberries, I was thinking about, there's a type of therapy that you do with like elderly folks. I think probably it would be good to do with people who maybe were terminally ill. And it's called reminiscence therapy. And it's just
Mhm.
basically what it sounds like, where you just kind of like walk through. I like to think of our brains as like we remember lots of things, but we kind of have like landmark memories that
Mhm.
help us kind of identify time and shifts in ourselves or like our circumstances, right? And so it's basically these movies, but a little bit gentler, let's say. And I was thinking about how good it can be for older folks to have an opportunity to really, really walk through their life with somebody who's just purely interested and engaged. And then I think about maybe that alone should be motivation to live in a way where that will be a pleasant experience for us to do when we
Mhm.
are old, right? I want to
Yeah.
have the type of experience as an old person, or, God forbid, like if I'm ever ill, whatever, like I would love to have the experience of being confronted with my past and being pretty okay with it.
Yeah.
I think that's all anyone wants, right? And so I think that even to imagine myself being confronted with the idea of being confronted with my life, right, is really what we're talking about. And
Yeah.
that does feel really motivating to me. Like, it's interesting, these movies are all about death, but I for sure walk away from them kind of feeling very alive and very, just like feeling very in my thoughts about like why it matters that I'm alive and what I need to do with that. So I love that. I don't know. This has been awesome though.
Yeah, yeah, it has. Wild Strawberries, I love that the young people in that movie are so they look at Sjöström's character and they think, he must have it all figured out. He's old, he must be so wise. He's going to accept basically a lifetime achievement award.
Yeah.
And they're like, you must know everything, right? And he's sitting there like, I don't know anything, and I miss being young, and if you can take those two in juxtaposition, you can try to like you understand
Yeah.
there is no point in your life necessarily where you're like this is the right age. So like let me appreciate, whatever it is about this age that I'm in right now. And I could die young, I could die very old, but
Yeah.
keeping that in mind, I think is an important part of living a good life. Wild strawberries in Swedish, it alludes to this expression, like an idiomatic expression of a special idyllic place that holds nostalgia, or somewhere that you feel safe and happy.
That makes a lot of sense, especially thinking about them kind of visiting his,
Yeah,
it seems like a summer home from his childhood, and like that being that place for him, right, where he has some difficult memories certainly, but clearly there's a fondness with which he
yeah.
remembers that time in his life. And so that's really that, see, lost it, things get lost in translation.
Yeah, yeah. And then in the seventh seal, there's a scene where they're eating wild strawberries in a field, and it's so funny. Bergman references himself in his other movie that both of these movies came out in the same year. But yeah, I mean, and then both of those scenes, of course, I think, as I said earlier, remind me of the scene in the Phantom Carriage, which is the only like good time in David's life with his family, picnicking. I'm so glad you watched all of them. Highly recommend everyone do the same thing. There's a bunch of other overlaps, right? You get this in the seventh seal, you get this physical embodiment of death, very similar to the carriage driver, the black cloak, and the scythe. I, I think the characterization of death is very funny in the seventh seal. He has like a sort of sense of humor.
Yeah, he has like a mischievous clown vibe to him almost.
When he's sawing the tree and the guy is like, "Would I have a performance?" He's like, "Canceled on account of death."
It's like almost cheesy, but it's done too well to be cheesy. Yeah, but I did love the idea of like playing chess with death. I had never, I understand that's like, this wasn't the first time that that was ever referenced anywhere, but that's like not something I had heard of. But my immediate reaction to the idea of playing chess with death is that like we are all doing that every single day of our lives, right?
Yeah.
We're like eating this, not eating that, doing this, not doing that, taking these meds, stopping these meds, like, which makes perfect, right? That's not like a criticism of that behavior, but it is funny, like, right? Isn't like life just one giant chess game with death?
Yes.
But we know we're gonna lose. That's like the real key of it,
Yeah.
right? Is it's a chess game that we know we're gonna lose, and we're playing defense the entire time.
Yeah, yeah, and that idea came like Bergman got that idea from a medieval painting in a
Yeah, I love the
church
painting.
that he saw, and but that movie is what has made it like really iconic in pop culture. Like if
Yeah.
you see it referenced in the show, which it, I mean, it's been referenced so many times, that's where they're pulling it from. But it's interesting because he, you know, the reason he wants to play chess of death and prolong, like he knows he's gonna lose, but he wants to prolong it just so that he can do one meaningful thing before he dies. And it is very similar, right, to the Phantom Carriage idea of just wanting to let your soul mature before you die. There's always like something that you want to do before it's too late. But they also, so Bergman and Sostrom both deal with a lot of themes of religion, atonement, guilt and remorse, death, ghosts and visions appear frequently in their work. You know, in the memory in Wild Strawberries. Oh, it's a dream. Sorry, not a memory. There's a lot of both, right? In Wild Strawberries, but the dream where there's literally a carriage driving like a hearse, and the coffin falls out, and
Yeah.
the clock doesn't have hands on it. Like all of that is pretty direct reference. And that scene is also filmed almost like a silent movie. Like it's very weird and eerie. There's no sound or talking or anything until there's the screeching hearse sound,
Yeah.
which is very similar to the violin score, the Phantom Carriage. But the Phantom Carriage didn't just influence Bergman. You know, we talked about The Shining already.
Yeah.
Charlie Chaplin actually said that this was the best movie ever made. He said, Victor Sostrom distinguishes himself with his finer feeling and better taste. He's the best director in the world, which is huge praise coming from Charlie
Yeah.
Chaplin. Lost Highway by David Lynch homages a shot from this, which is it's the jail shot. It's like framed almost identically. I don't know if you've seen Lost Highway, but
No, I haven't, but
um,
I will have to.
yeah, there's another like shot for shot comparison. And then I also saw there's a point where the wife or the mom leans over Edith's bed with her like hands up by her face. That's very similar to Dracula leaning over the woman's bed in the Bela Lugosi
Yeah, it looks
one.
very sinister.
Yeah. Super sinister. Oh, I want to talk a little bit too about some of the other film techniques because we talked about the color tinting, and we talked
Mhm.
about shooting at night. We talked about obviously the multiple exposures. One thing that I thought was really cool in this watch is I noticed this triangular composition that he uses where there's two people in the foreground having a conversation and there's another person in the background doing something else and it's off center. He does this multiple times. And I watched Citizen Kane a few weeks ago, and that setup is done frequently in that movie to impressive effect. And I was rewatching it, I was like, this has to have influenced that movie because of the way that the shots are set up is so similar. And then he also does a lot of like panning around the scene and showing things at different angles, kind of breaking the 180-degree rule
Yeah.
in film where, you know, early films especially were very much like set up as if it was a stage, you know, and we can only be on this side of
Yeah.
the stage. And he breaks that frequently. And then also the iris focus is what it's called, where you take the screen and you like black out, you know,
Yeah.
large portions and just have a circle.
I think that was used so well in this movie, especially. Like, I really liked when that came into play. It just,
Yeah.
it's like so, it feels so intense in such a fun way.
Yeah, it has a great narrative effect because it uses it at times to show, you know, David's isolation from other people and his loneliness. You know, it mirrors our own focus on the screen, the way that he's kind of like self oriented, I think.
Yeah, and I think it makes you really
Um,
focus on people's face. I mean, we've talked about like the emphasis like more on more shots of people's faces, and I think the times where like you're really just not there's nothing else to look at, so you're kind of confronted with what is going on for this person in front of me.
yeah, and it's not just a normal close up, but it's like let's look at this one particular part of the screen. It's very cool. People don't really do that anymore.
Yeah,
Funnily enough, in 1930, a French film critic complained that this movie had not aged well due to the special effects.
That's unbelievable to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also could like, imagine. I do wonder though, like, is there kind? Because I feel that way about movies that are like fairly recent, and I kind of wonder if when it's closer and you're seeing the difference that 5 years can make, or 10 years can make, or 30 years can make. It's like I
Yeah.
do wonder if that changes it because like this is now and in a way that it probably wasn't when that critic said that. I feel
Mhm.
like the way it is now is it's like in its own category of thing because it has become so old.
Yeah. Yeah, like at the time they're less than 10 years out, right? So maybe multiple exposures fell out of favor as this effect for showing like supernatural ghosts or spirits or whatever, and so they see that and it makes it feel very dated.
Yeah.
Is it
That's so funny. I was talking to we're redoing my like grandma's house right now, and I like
Mhm.
was talking to my family about like my opinions about home decoration trends and how like they make your house look so dated so quickly because they come in and out of fashion so much compared to if you just like think about what you like and just go with that and then it is kind of timeless in that way. And I feel like
Mhm.
it's like a
Mhm.
it's like a similar thing here, right? Where certainly they were working with like what they had, but they really, really did the best version of the thing that they were doing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if something else came into favor because they were doing the best version of this thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think the way we appraise these movies now versus then is it takes a long time for you to know if a movie is going to be legendary,
Totally. Yeah,
right?
you can't tell that in a couple of years at all.
Yeah. I mean, Citizen Kane was not really fully appreciated until like 20 years after it came out. I think I heard recently that there's I don't know if you've seen that movie, but there's newsreel footage at the beginning that is very much supposed to mimic a newsreel of the particular time that it came out, and it aired a few years later in France than it did in the United States, and people were like angry or like thought that like the newsreel like it's so dated, it's so like are you why are you showing this old movie?
Which is so funny because it totally just provides you the context of the movie. I don't know. I can't remember what I was watching, but I recently watched something in like Espresso, like the Sabrina Carpenter song Espresso was in it. And I was like, wow, in like 50 years, people are going to be like, wow, that movie is so of its time, right? Like it, I don't even remember what it was, but it's kind of that same type of thing, right? Where it's, if you watch a movie and the song Espresso comes out, you know when that movie takes place. Like you don't know when that movie takes place unless they talk about it and make it something else. Like you're going to be like, oh yeah, that was like this summer.
Yeah. So, is this a horror movie?
I think yes, but my general thesis is that lots of things that don't get called horror movies are horror movies, and they don't get called
Ah.
horror movies because horror is like a stigmatized genre. So to me, Phantom Carriage is absolutely a horror movie.
Yeah, yeah. I think both Wild Strawberries and Seventh Seal have horror scenes. The dream sequence in Wild Strawberries, absolutely.
Wild Strawberry, some of the dream sequences kind of felt like a little Twilight Zoney to me.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. And the Phantom Carriage, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a reason why it's been referenced like so clearly in different horror movies. I think it sets up a lot of tropes. It sets up a lot of mood. It definitely isn't like evolved into the horror tropes that we see today. It's not scary in the way like it doesn't have any jump scares. It doesn't have any big twists, but it forces us to think about something that's really
I
scary.
feel like the mom poisoning the kids is a twist. That to me feels like
Oh, that's a great point.
yeah.
That's a
I think
great
that's like
point.
I think that is literally so like that's a classic to me. And like this might even
All
be
right.
yeah, no, right? Because you see them in that scene, but you don't know that's happening. And then later you're like, holy shit, she's about to kill herself and her children. Like
You're so right.
not a
That is a
twist.
great point.
Yeah. It's not like a twist in the traditional way where it's been set up to be a different thing. It just like hasn't been set up as anything. And it's like introduced late, right? But yeah. And I think I would say The Seventh Seal feels like horror because to me, anything that's like surreal and dark to me is horror because I'm horrified by it. Like, I find like there are parts of it that just unsettle me in the way that I associate with horror so much, and like they're not all like really kind of like objectively like horror kind of parts. Like, it's just it's under my
Yeah.
skin in a way that to me feels like horror.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think horror is such a broad genre that really includes a lot of other genres.
Right.
Depending on the movie, it can be a comedy, it can be a romance, it can be fantasy, it can be,
Hmm.
you know, more like a thriller or
Yeah.
anything between. It's like saying sci-fi as a genre. Sci-fi is a topic. Like, is it really a genre?
It is, but it's like I have to now I'm gonna have to think about if I feel this way about sci-fi, and I probably do. But I like generally just like if someone tells me they don't like any horror movies, I'm inclined to not believe them. Like, I think they believe it. I don't think they're lying, but I think they're wrong because I do think what horror is, what it's like fear, shock, disgust. Those are like I think
Mhm,
the definition words. And
mhm.
I feel that way about a lot of movies that are not classified as horror. And I think that it is a genre, like it's a genre, I guess, but it's also just like so much its own thing that it's almost like saying I don't like TV. You know what I mean? And it's like
Yeah,
you might not like
yeah,
love to sit down and watch TV all the time, but like I'm sure there's been a show that you've really liked, right? And
yeah.
so and I mean, I think that's like something that I have liked. My friends are often giving me opportunities to find horror movies that they will enjoy, which is one of my favorite things to do, is to kind of convince people that they do in fact like it. Because I don't think everybody likes to be scared, which is totally valid. Like,
Yeah,
I do think that's really
yeah,
true. I don't think everybody likes to be scared, but
yeah.
first of all, that's super subjective anyway. All this is really subjective. Yeah, not it's not always scary. Like, the Phantom Carriage isn't it's like kind of existentially scary, I guess, but it's not scary like boo scary. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, you're not gonna have trouble, like, going to sleep at night probably after watching this
But
movie.
or you will, because you will be thinking so much about like the implications of it, right? You might not be you're
True.
not like looking around your room at the shadows, right? Like, you might actually
Yeah.
like the like I don't know, the new Nosferatu, right? Like, you might be kind of like, oh, like it's dark in my room, I don't love that right now, but you might be. And this is like, I would
You're
even
s
go so far as to say this is related to the name of the podcast of like what haunts you, because I would say like this is a movie that will like kind of haunt me, not necessarily in a bad way, but it is like it's one that I want to continually turn over in my head and like dissect.
Mhm. You're scared, when you go to sleep, but not in a way that the nightlight will help.
Yeah, which I think is ultimately the most kind of human fear.
Death, I think, is one of the scariest things there is, and all three of these movies do a really great job of exploring that.
Yeah.
One last horror connection for you is Max von Sydow, the knight in The Seventh Seal, is the older priest in The
That
Exorcist.
is so funny. I thought he looked familiar and I couldn't place him. And I was like, I must just be wrong because that would be so random for me to have seen him in anything else. That's really funny.
Yep.
That's really funny.
Yeah, he was in a lot of Bergman's movies, and then he did manage to actually transition over to Hollywood,
Yeah.
but was mostly typecast in these like religious roles.
He does have that.
So,
He does have that look. I mean, I get it.
yeah, yeah.
That's cool. I think that death is one of the scariest things. That's why we're always coming back to it. But I think in my mind, I think I find it in equal measures scary and comforting.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that
I
these
agree.
movies are focused on the scary side, right? And the side of like of dying with all this regret and all this kind of pain. But
Mhm.
yeah, like I said before, it leaves kind of a weirdly positive taste in my mouth of like wanting to do right by myself and right by my understanding of the world.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of What Haunts You, a podcast about the stories that haunt our dreams. Thanks again so much to Kelly for bringing me this awesome set of movies. Remember, you can find Kelly on Letterboxd at Kellyvk if you want to keep up with her and what she's watching. Kelly will absolutely be returning to discuss more movies with me in the future. We are already tossing around some ideas for what she'll bring in next. Our next episode is going to be the first episode of our series exploring horror through the decades, uncovering the political and social influences on the genre over time. We'll be starting with the Roaring Twenties and heading straight through the 30s into the Great Depression, also covering the development of the Motion Picture Production Code, more commonly known as the Hays Code. I hope that this episode got you ready to dive further into some old movies. I'll be sure to include a list of the movies that I'm covering in the next episode in the episode description in case you want to check them out before listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and in the spirit of acknowledging that life is really just a game of chess against death and that we always lose, go do something nice for someone today, or something nice for yourself.